just living the dream under this southern sky. It's where stories are born and legends never die.
Okay, I'm Johnny Ponder. This is my 5th podcast, and I just got a real special guest for today. I got Brandon Bobo. He is a wildlife biologist, and Brandon, you want to just say a little something about yourself and what you do or what you don't do or whatever you want to do?
Yes, sir. There's a lot I don't do,
Yeah.
but seems like a lot I do also. I'm a native of the area. I'm from Oxford, born and raised. My family's heritage is there. Matter of fact, I could go telling stories about that for a while, but
Tell all of them you want.
Yeah, well, actually, if you know where the Camping World in Oxford is, across the street on 78 is Bobo Lane, and that was my family's property. Yes, so way back before there was an interstate or Highway 78, that was what was theirs. That stretched across Chakalaka, which is now the Oxford Exchange.
Right.
And so that would have been my family's land way back in the day. In fact, if you look at topo maps, I found this, going to the east of it, you'll see a Bobo branch.
Oh,
and so
really?
I can only surmise that must have been my heritage
You
from
missed
then.
being rich this far.
I know, right? That's what I tell everybody.
Far.
It's funny. I get my hair cut over there at Great Clips, which is right where I used to shoot quail when I was a little kid. And I can barely remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And I tell them that, and I say, I wish I could have got some of that money when they sold that place and developed it. But no, I didn't get any of that.
And it ended up in a lot of it in the Davis family.
Yes, sir.
Todd Davis.
Yep. And Miss Davis was the one that owned all that. That's now where the Publix is. That was a big field. She had all the Christmas decorations every year.
Yeah.
So me and my granddaddy and my brother and my daddy, we'd go out there and shoot quail. She'd let us shoot quail when they were still around, at least.
Now, I understand that Mr. Davis wouldn't allow her to decorate for Christmas, and when he passed away, she went crazy.
That's what I heard, and she did too. It was nice. We'd go through there every year, back when the Woodbridge was still there.
Yeah, well, it's still there.
It is. You just can't get to
right.
it. Yeah.
Right. Okay, and now you're with
NRCS. I'm with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we're an agency under the Department of Agriculture. And so what I do now, similar to as you know, I was formerly with the National Wild Turkey Federation, and I worked with NRCS a lot when I was with NWTF. And so it's always been helping private landowners, doing whether it's wildlife or management for wildlife on their property. Could be even crop farmers, could be irrigation for that, even grazing land operations with cattle farmers. We do things with high tunnels and just gardening. We do a lot of things with poultry operations. So I deal with pretty much all natural resources, and so the title fits with Natural Resources Conservation Service. But I've been with them for 5 years, and prior to that I was with NWTF for 7, and that's how I became a certified wildlife biologist. Yes, sir.
Now you were didn't you have a little stint with County Extension?
No, sir. I worked with them a lot. I didn't have a stint with Extension, but I did work with the Park Service. So before I came on with NWTF, I spent 2 years working as a biologist. What was that called? I can't think of the name. A field biologist, basically. A biological technician. And I basically worked on Horseshoe Bend National Military Park, doing all their grunt work for 2 years, me and a couple of other guys, right after going through Auburn. And so after that, that's when I got the job with NWTF. I was with them 7 years. And like I said, then after that, I moved on to NRCS.
I think you were with NWTF when I first met you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
I believe so.
I remember that. I may have met you at a banquet or something somewhere.
Probably. I did quite a few of them.
I did. I used to do the Jake's event out here on 77. And I would always save enough stuff, and I'd always do one at the Jake's at the banquet too.
Yeah, save a lot of feathers, all that stuff to give the kids.
Yeah, that's cool. I have people call me all the time wanting feathers for some reason, like they think I got any. Which I do have a good many. But.
A lot of people nowadays get into the primitive archery, and I've seen where you can send your feathers in, and they'll burn them for fletchings.
No kidding.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I saw somebody was doing that on Facebook. It was really interesting.
Really, I saw that nice gobbler you got a week ago.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, a blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while.
He can't help it. He can't help it. When I first left GP, I'd have a lot of people call me and want me to buy their timber. And I was in that so long that, I don't know, just some of the people that sold me their timber had sold it to me before, and they just had built a trust, or I had built a trust with them, and they wouldn't fool with nobody else. And so that went on for a pretty good bit, and I think most of them are gone now. And but that happened to me a lot of times. I made some friends all the way as far as California, absentee landowners.
You can make friends in California?
Well,
it's hard, I reckon.
Northern California. Let's put it that
Okay.
way.
I got you.
Yeah, good question, though. All right. Brandon's going to talk. I'm going to ask him a question, and I know he's been asked this a million times. What do you think it could possibly be the main cause of our turkey populations dropping off?
I know he was going to hit me with that one.
Did you?
I knew he was going to hit me with that one. Yeah, so to answer the question, I don't know.
Well, that's what most people.
But I will say I don't think it's any silver bullet, to use that old saying. There's no one specific reason. Now, I hadn't been in the turkey world per se, but I do follow a lot of the articles, and I still follow, like, anybody that's watching or listening could look up Dr. Mike Chamberlain with University of Georgia, and he is probably the leading expert right now with turkey research. And they're looking at all variables from disease, predation, habitat, the timing and framework of the seasons and the bag limits in the states, which as I do, that's changed a lot over the past just decade, and so there's no one real answer, but I think it's a culmination of a lot of those things. When I was with NWTF, the big deal was LPDV, which is just short for lymphoproliferative disease virus. I think I got that right.
Oh yeah, I knew that.
But that's one that they thought, hey, this is what's going on. Well, then they come to find out it's been in the birds for a long time.
Is that the blackhead disease?
Well, it leads to other diseases. So it's equivalent to a turkey having like an autoimmune disorder, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it basically will facilitate other pathogens. So it's fairly common, but what they're finding is that most diseases like blackhead, which is histaminiasis in that case, would probably have more likely infect a bird that had LPDV. But yeah, histaminiasis or blackhead is something that's common with areas that receive chicken litter, not from a broiler house, which is most common around us, but laying houses.
Yeah.
If you know a little bit about the disease, it comes from a fecal worm, and it has like a multi-stage life cycle. So it has to have enough time in the bird system to become effective at passing on into a flock. And so the birds that are in the chicken house, they have to be older. In a broiler house, it's like 6 weeks, and they're out of there. They're
right.
Full size. They really don't have time to contract that histaminiasis because, see, it doesn't affect chickens. They just pass it. But if it's in a laying house, it's very common because they'll have it and they'll have no ill effects from it. But what'll happen is they'll take the litter and they'll put it on an area that turkeys may be feeding. And the research shows there, it's no definitive answer again, but it can be 6 up to 12, even maybe more years that particular worm, well, it really at that point it's just a pathogen that's contracted through the ground, through the soil, but it can stay effective and have efficacy in that soil for that amount of time. So when you put out chicken litter, when I was with NWTF, I always asked that question, and I would advise, never put out any from a laying house. Make sure it's from a broiler house, and then you should be fine.
Yeah. Well, I've heard all about that. You know, we heard a lot of stuff about CWD in a deer, and of course they're blaming that on feeding corn.
Right.
Well, what about if you do feed corn? What's the best way to do it? Let me put it this way: up off the ground, I would assume.
Off the ground, keeping it dry be important, just because at that point you're talking about aflatoxins, which
Right.
are what accumulate basically from moisture, and it's kind of like a large petri dish that you're accumulating all this bacteria, and the aflatoxin comes along with that, and that can basically accumulate in deer, turkey, anything that eats it. Aflatoxins are everywhere, even in the corn we get. But the amount of aflatoxin just goes up astronomically, exponentially when you start having it, for an extended period of time on the ground where it's wet. So keeping it dry. If landowners are going to feed for turkey or quail, in Texas what they do, and they have to, they it's not really just supplemental feeding. It's actually a necessity that they are required that if they're going to have turkeys and quail, because they're so seasonal with their droughts, they're basically scattering across the whole property and using these big, huge tanker trucks that are filled with seed and just spreading it everywhere. Now, that's probably not practical in Alabama, but I would say if you're going to feed, if you can get out there and broadcast it and you got the time and effort and you want to really protect from any kind of diseases, that's probably a better way to do it. Another thing to consider is when you have turkeys with something like blackhead, then they're transmitting that virus in that condensed location. So if you're putting it on the ground in one spot, they're transmitting it to one another. Whereas if you're spreading it out, they're less likely to transmit it.
Well, when we had the little stock market crash in '08, you remember that?
Yes, sir.
That's right when I got laid off, incidentally. But anyway, that's kind of started the downfall of these turkeys in this area, I think. And what happened was the only habitat that was being created was from timber cutting. There wasn't a lot of brood habitat being just manufactured on somebody's land. They didn't get out there and do that. And so the poult habitat really dropped off. Well, that kind of stuff with turkeys, it don't hurt them the next year.
Right.
It's a time delay thing where it hurts them in years.
Generations.
That's right. And I believe that. I think maybe we've a little overprotected raptors, maybe a little bit.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I've never thought about that in terms of the time frame and those. That's why I say there's so many variables, because you think about the housing market is a thing that collapsed so much. So that obviously leads to less of a timber market, which thereby cuts down on your timber harvest.
You couldn't hardly sell a tract of timber. And another thing too, Brandon, they quit managing for logs and started managing for smaller diameter trees.
CNS.
For LVL mills and that kind of stuff, and that way the rotation drops significantly in their rotation of trees.
Right.
So that's another thing that I think had an effect on it. I mean, they had bushes out there and they were probably good for deer, but turkeys didn't do too good in it.
Right.
Turkey about has to tote his lunch with him when he walks across the plantation.
I see a lot of people and they'll say, I've always been able to kill turkeys in this area, and it may be nothing but pine straw underneath trees that are just pretty much ready or beyond where they need to be thinned. And I say, well, that's because you're able to see them coming through. It doesn't mean they're using that. In fact, they probably don't have any benefit from it other than loafing through or roosting. Because essentially, when you have a pine stand that has no understory, you're talking about what we call an ecological desert.
Right.
There's really nothing beneficial for them out there.
It's pretty. People see the deer crossing it or the bunch of turkeys crossing it, and I'll tell you what you call those animals. They're visitors, just passing through.
Transients.
Yeah. And sometimes uglier the woods are, the better they are. There was a
I've
biologist.
heard that a lot.
There was a biologist told me one time that the closer to the ground that your diversity is, the healthier your forest is.
That's interesting you say that, because with NWTF, we always would say, when you're talking about managing for turkey, very similar to quail, you get, by managing for turkey or quail, they're going to benefit one another. And it's because we would always suggest look at it from knee high down, which is what, a hen's looking at to rear broods, to lay nests. And so all that makes perfect sense. It does make me think back to when I was working in, I think it was in Coosa County. I was with a landowner, and I was helping him get some longleaf planted, which he did and did a good job. He had probably 80 to 100 acres, and he'd planted about 40 of it in longleaf, had a little bottom that he had done in some hardwoods, and did a little bit of loblolly. So he had some good diversity, but what he wanted, he didn't like that it was growing up thick and he couldn't get through there and he couldn't see it. And he said, I need to know how I can get it cleared out where I can see. And I said, well, do you want wildlife? He's like, yes, sir. And he said, and I said, well, what about, the aesthetics? He said, well, I want to be able to see through it, and be able to get through it. I said, well, it sounds like you want to have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's
and
what
you
it
got to
is.
make a decision. So it really forces him to kind of make a conscious decision about, do I really need to see through this? Or maybe some of this brush in here is what they need for cover, specifically like deer, and escape cover for turkeys. We briefly mentioned predation, but having those buffered edges where you've got transitional cover that goes from knee high to chest high to head high into the forest, it really mitigates the effect that predators will have, because what they use when they hunt is called the edge effect. And they'll basically run edges of tree lines, they'll run the edges of crop fields, hay fields, and they'll go through just where we would drive. That's why you see them a lot, especially at night. And they'll run those edges till they catch scent. And when they catch scent, they just dart in. And if there's no mitigating cover, then they can be much more effective. And so if you have that transitional cover, you have that structural component in your vegetation, which just is basically diversity, then it's much more effective at keeping the predation less effective. And so you've got two components there. You've got not just predation, but also habitat. So that's why I say when you talk about what are potential reasons for decline, a myriad of things that could lead to it.
Sure could. Even the droughts that we had.
Absolutely. When I used to give recommendations, or at least I was asked to give forecasts a lot of times on how we would expect turkey populations to be that year, specifically for 2-year-olds or jakes. And I would always go back and look 2 years prior at the drought data. And sometimes when you have drought, of course, it's going to affect them just from the production standpoint of vegetation. But conversely, if you look at years where you've had major flood events, that's probably one of the biggest causes of nest loss. And not only nest loss, but if you have flood events when poults are being reared and they're on the ground in that 1 to 2 week period before they can get on the limb, they'll die of hypothermia, in 50 plus
just
degree
heavy
weather.
rains will do that.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah.
So that can really contribute to your hatch, and then 2 years down the road to how many gobblers you have. So it's interesting, because I was thinking about this last year when we had all these cicadas.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's absolutely almost guaranteed that's going to affect the population 2 years from then, which would be the jakes that we may be seeing this year.
Seen a lot of them this year.
Oh yeah, and the thing about it is, if you heard those cicadas, they were everywhere around you. But like I live in Oxford, we hardly saw any or heard any, at least where I live. But my office in Talladega, we had to sweep them out of the drive every day because they were just covered. You couldn't walk on the ground without stepping on them, and it was that constant hum outside that you'd hear them. It's funny. I drove home one day. I had one on my back. I didn't even know it. And I kept hearing something in my truck, that sound. I kept looking behind me. I got home and I walked inside, and my daughter's like, "Oh my goodness!" I had to go out there and get my wife to come pull off a cicada off my back.
Do you still live up here, McIntosh?
Well, I live close to there. That's where Mom and Daddy's farm is, right next to Mr. Bannister, and that's where I grew up. But I moved over. I actually have 34 acres right now on Chakalaka.
Good.
And so my property goes all the way down the creek.
Cool.
And it was, so that's, this is just what I did with my property, not saying that everybody should do this, but my emphasis was wildlife and forest management. So when I bought it, it was in 30 acres of hay. Now, the guy was haying it, and he said, I'll keep doing the deal for you. I'll cut your hay, and you don't have to pay me anything. And I said, well, what are you going to pay me? He said, well, I'll cut it for free. And I'm like, okay, well, that tells me everything I need to know. So after that, I actually planted 20 acres of it in pines, and I had to do loblolly because it's a floodplain.
Yeah, if it's down there close to the creek, you couldn't, longleaf wouldn't live.
You couldn't do it, and shortleaf either. They don't like wet feet. So I planted loblolly, and it's done really well. The side index is like 100 down there. And so it's going to do, Lord willing, it'll do well. But that is just an example of where I don't have turkeys, but you go a half mile down the road and they're everywhere. You know? And so I think that the reason I don't have them is because you've got this contiguous area of just hayland with some cattle mixed in there, but it's all pasture. And there is some area that has hardwoods, but they're a little bit, it's probably a half a mile from me, and they're only about 15 years old. So I don't think they're mature enough to really hold turkeys, at least for mass production and roosting habitat. Yeah. So hopefully, my plan is to have some income down the road, maybe when I get a full cut, and then also to create some of that habitat, that diversity where it's beautiful to look out in that hayfield, and we love it. But to keep some of that beauty, I kept 4 acres of food plot directly behind my house, so you can see Coldwater Mountain across the creek from me. And then I've got another 2 acres down on the creek that I kept for another little food plot. So, you still can have some of what you want. You just got to kind of determine what your goals and objectives are and tailor your property to that.
You down below the Chakalaka Park?
Well, no, I'm real close to McIntosh. If you're at the end of Anniston Airport, which is in Oxford, but down at the end of the runway, right across from the runway, that's our property right there.
On the south side of the creek?
Yes, sir.
So you're in there pretty close to Billy Ray and
camp?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yep. So when I planted
my trees, if he's your neighbor, you got a great neighbor there.
Well, that's what see, when I started planting the trees, I guess that's Ray's dad, Billy Ray. Mm-hmm. So I called Ray and just talked to him about, because he's in the timber industry,
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what do you think about me doing this? And he said, you see my property, and it's all covered in loblolly. And I said, all right, well, I know what I need to know, because 20 acres can be hard to cut, hard to get it to sell it. But my conversation with him was, well, your trees are about 2 years older, so when you get ready to thin, I'll just have it right down the road where I can have the logger just come right over there and cut it. Yeah. And so 20 acres, I don't always make recommendation. I typically try to say 40. Which can be, and it always going to depend on where you're at. We're lucky to have GP come back to Talladega to start doing, some more work there, and that helps the timber market. So that definitely really factors in.
But they use well, it's kind of funny. They actually can use a smaller log than we could as a plywood mill. Mm-hmm. But they need a little more grade than we needed. And another thing about it is, the logs they're buying are as good as what we bought. I hated to admit that to the procurement people down there, but I did. I said, dang, y'all buying better logs than we bought.
They get the good stuff. Yeah. I saw some coming out this morning that was pulp, and I'm not sure where all of it goes, but I know a lot of it goes to Rome.
Yeah, a lot of it goes down to the chip mill in Childersburg.
I think that's where they were going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of it goes up there to Chronospan mill there in Ohatchee.
Right.
That used to be our mill, I had procurement responsibilities at that mill. Okay, now the longer this goes, Brandon, the tougher the questions are going to get.
Oh, all
yeah,
right.
yeah. Let me ask you about one thing that's kind of controversial. Warm season burning.
Okay.
You know, that's been a real controversial, even within some of the agencies. The Forest Service had people.
I need a
that
drink of
didn't like
water before I start.
Yeah, put that fire out. But warm season burning, it has, you're going to have some collateral damage. I understand that. But I think the habitat that it builds in the long run is better.
I would say without a doubt that's correct. Anytime I get this question, my response is the same. Anytime you can burn at any level is a good time to burn.
Yeah.
If it's during the nesting season, you may burn up some nests, but and I'll tell you the research that I went by when I was with NWTF was based on a lot of the Forest Service research, which are large, broadscape, thousands of acres burning at a time, which I would never recommend. And I know the Forest Service really probably doesn't ideally want that to be the case, but based on personnel and based on timing, they kind of have to do that. And we should really be thankful so we don't end up like California, right?
Or like Gatlinburg.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just
yes.
the same night that we had that big fire up here.
So I think that any time you can get it burned is good, and if you the research, as I was saying, it basically shows that the impact on nest is almost negligible. And when you did have, which was less than 1% nest that got depredated from fire, so in other words, it would come through and burn up the nest, which was rare because typically the area that they're nesting in is pretty green and it's pretty thick around it and it almost insulates it. So in a lot of those cases in those research, it was done in Louisiana and I think another area I think was Arkansas, but I know a lot of it was in Louisiana. And what they found was that even after fire passed through, the turkey would leave, and then when it came through, the hen would come back and sit that nest all the way to hatch. The other consideration is if it does depredate it and it basically burns them up, in most cases that's probably a Jenny that's not very adequate with her nesting ability because they learn how to get better at where they put their nest.
First year.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so what we would see is they would typically come in and re-nest, after that first time. And you get a lot of that every year, even without fire, just from, raccoons, like we've talked about. Snakes are a big predator that you can't do a whole lot about, other than just killing snakes. And that's another thing about predators. You remove one, another one fills the gap, especially with nest. I've even seen white-tailed deer eat turkey
I've
eggs.
heard that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And so back to the point of the burning, smaller compartments are always better. If it's anywhere 40 acres, or I was with a quail biologist today, and that was her recommendation still. It's 40 acres or less in blocks. The smaller, the better. The more juxtaposed, in other words, the more scattered and checkerboard you can get them, the better. And less intensive burns, so they're not so hot and scorching. The better. And if you can avoid that season, maybe early in March on into, right now there are probably a lot of birds already nesting, some of them maybe not, but later April into May, if you can avoid that time, then do it, It just depends on your manpower. But another thing to consider is if you're having trouble with like sweet gum or, any broadleaf like privet, the best time to burn it to be most effective is in the spring when it's budding out. And so, you got to kind of, again, weigh what your goals and objectives are. If you really want to get rid of that component and have a clean stand, then you really need to burn it in the growing season because it's going to be most effective.
If you burn when the salp's down, privet especially will spread.
Oh, yes.
It'll spread it. You can't hold it. My daddy said that the best way in the world to get rid of privet is to move off and leave it. You agree with that? He said the same.
I agree.
He said the same thing about mimosa too.
Mimosa, yeah.
Kudzu, those kind of things. Yeah, okay. I told you we're going to get a little hotter with each question. I'm going to ask you this one. What do you think about when the Conservation Advisory Board in Montgomery said that we need to do away with fall turkey seasons?
So I'll just be full disclosure
I want
here.
you to.
I actually was on the committee. Now, I was on the Wild Turkey Advisory Committee after they did that with the fall season. And I know you kind of led the charge in keeping it in the counties we have.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you for that.
Yeah.
But from what I was told on that committee when I came on is that the reason that it was left in those counties is because that's the only counties that people came and showed their voice and made it known that they did fall turkey hunt. And so what I was told is that they didn't have really any data from harvest for birds in fall season that weren't in those counties. Now, does that mean nobody was fall hunting them? Absolutely not. I'm sure there were turkey hunters shooting them in the fall. But I think one thing they're trying to do is trying to help the population by reducing that opportunity to take, right? So taking the fall season out was something that would, in their mind, facilitate that.
Well, I've always said, too, there's one problem with fall turkey season, and I agreed with it, that you have a lot of people out there deer hunting in a county that has a fall turkey season. And they see a turkey, might be a hen, but they're going to blast it because they heard it's turkey season.
Right.
You know what I mean? In other words, it's not the turkey hunters that caused it. It would be another group of hunters that caused it. And I can understand that. I can understand why that would happen. And I know it would, especially on public land. But I think they actually did away with the fall season in all the national forests, didn't they?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think they did.
Well, I hate that because, to give you a little historical information about turkey season, when they first enacted hunting seasons in the state of Alabama back in the 20s or 30s,
Right.
there wasn't a spring season, wasn't nothing but a fall season. And you went out there and you fall hunted, and there wasn't no deer to speak of, especially around here. I remember one time we were sitting in the house on a Sunday afternoon watching a football game, and somebody come by there and said they seen a deer track down at McKelder. Really? Yeah. We all loaded up in Daddy's old station wagon and went down there to see that deer track. I'm not kidding you.
It's interesting that you say that because my granddaddy, and I've still got the 30-30 Marlin that he shot his only deer with in his entire life. And he grew up where I talked about on the farm over there on Chakalaka, and they basically shot quail for sustenance because they were so abundant in those days.
Yeah.
And that's what they ate, quail. And it's an interesting story, you'll like this. He would jump shoot wood ducks in the creeks on Chakalaka Creek. So he'd walk down the creek with his brothers. He had 7 brothers and sisters, 2 sisters, and they'd walk down the creek and jump shoot wood ducks barefoot with water moccasins and everything. And this would not be during the duck season, okay? So I always ask, I asked Granddaddy, I said, why in the world would you get in there barefoot? He said, we only had one pair of shoes, and we dang sure couldn't take them in there and get them wet and dirty in the swamp. I thought, man, I thought I had it rough when my waders leak a little bit. Like, my goodness.
That's a regular Loretta Lynn story right there, wasn't it?
Kidding.
Got
They were
them
tough.
a brand new pair every year.
They were tough.
I can remember going barefooted so long into the fall and everything, knowing dang well there were snakes out. Mama would have to make us wear shoes. Now, we wore shoes to school, but I tell you what, another thing that she would do, she wouldn't let us go to town. She'd give us a quarter, and we'd go down there and go to the picture show. But she wouldn't let us go barefooted because she said them old men spitting tobacco on them sidewalks, and she didn't want us stepping in it, you know.
Oh,
of course,
me.
when she told me that, I didn't want to step in it either.
Oh, me.
But, you know, we did a lot of things. But I was telling you about that no spring turkey season. And then it was some people, I'm going to guess this, that it came out of Missouri, where the spring turkey hunting first became popular.
That sounds about right.
And so they started trying it here. Now, you take a lot of your officials don't want anything but a spring turkey season because they don't want anybody shooting turkeys that they might get to hunt in the spring.
Right.
They want to duck hunt and deer hunt during the fall.
Sure.
And a lot of that came from that. Gunner Guy, you remember him?
I do.
We was up at Rogersville one time. Clark and I were up there. And Clark asked him, said, I'm having a hard time squaring something. Not 10 minutes ago, you said that the Department of Conservation, the game wardens, or the wildlife people, Chuck Seitz, and them, said that fall turkey hunting did not harm the turkey populations. And Chuck Sykes was there, and he agreed with it. He said, yes, that's right, I did say that, and I don't think it does. All of the biologists with the Forest Service said the same thing. One reason is there wasn't many people fall turkey.
Right.
Well, Gunner Guy said in his opening remarks that they didn't do anything without sufficient scientific data to back it up. So he said...
That was... Okay.
Clark got up there. Now, he's an attorney, so he catches on to every word. And he said, well, Mr. Guy, you just said that you didn't do anything like that with the ruse and everything without good science-based data to back it up. We want to see the data you got to close in fall turkey season. You could have heard a pin drop in that room because Gunner Guy with he didn't have anything. His own people were saying it was okay. But I'm telling you, it was just a political thing.
I understand that, and the thing is, you can't really say with full confidence that you're only going to make changes based on the science, because, and I'll say this because when I was with the turkey committee, we'd give recommendations based on the research. And I also saw during the time when the baiting, was the big deal.
Yeah.
And the reason that got pushed through was told because it would be more effective at killing hogs. And I just have to say the research does not show that.
Really?
So I would say that when you talk about how it's being legislated, the Conservation Advisory Board does not have to adhere to science. They take recommendations, right? So if the science says this, but you have constituents that say another, then you make a decision based on what's most important.
I guess so.
I guess that's my best way of not incriminating myself.
That is a very good way to explain it. It sure
Right.
is. And I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
But anyway, I guess we better kind of knock this off because I like to keep them around 15, 20 minutes. We've probably been going that long, haven't we?
I figured it'd be an hour.
Okay,
I'll talk as long as you want.
No, I would like to keep them a little longer. What I want to do is hold you to you coming back.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to.
And let's do this again. Tell a few turkey stories. Now, I was talking to a guy that was a theology professor at Mississippi College, and he was a big Baptist, member of that Baptist Association and everything. And we were riding down the road, and I told him, I said, Dr. R., I said, I've always thought, not my grandparents, my granddaddy told me that somewhere in the Bible it says that it's okay to lie about turkey hunting. He says, no, I don't think it is. I don't think it. Well, it's got to be in there somewhere. I don't think he would have told me that.
Are you asking me a question here? Okay, because all I can say is, hey, Rahab told a lie, and it definitely allowed them to get through the walls of Jericho. But that's all I'm really going to say about that.
Okay.
Whether she was a turkey hunter or not, I don't know.
All right. Well, all I'm going to
not.
hold you to is coming back one day, and we'll try to do it. Say, but right before hunting season comes in. What do you think?
I love the idea.
I'm going to try to do one of these a week.
Sounds good to me, and I'd love to get on here and just talk, hunting stories.
Yeah, and jot down a few that you can tell.
I will.
Remind you, and we'll tell a few. I could add to them a little bit,
Hey, that sounds like fun.
I'm good at embellishing stories.
Oh, we all are. Hey, we're turkey hunters.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. It was real nice to have Brandon. Brandon's good, and I hope you do come back. And we're going to do this again next week. I think next week it might be a little something to do with NASCAR and racing with us. I'm going to have Dave Marcus here staying at my house when we go to the track, and we might even chase a turkey or two. We've been known to do that. And hopefully I'll get some people, some other drivers and everything to talk a little bit, and we'll put together a podcast for next week about that. But all right, look forward to doing this would be the 5th one, and that would be the 6th one. We're trying to keep up with it, but I'll end up losing count. But okay, we'll see you next time.
He's just living the dream under this southern sky. It's where stories are born and legends never die.